The problem. A tragic accident occurred on December 7th that resulted in 10,800 metric tons of crude oil being spilled into the western region of Korea. After 4 months of continuous efforts by over 1 million volunteers, the hazardous contamination still remains. Current cleanup methods. In our initial observation of the contamination site, we noticed all the hard labor and intensive work that the residents of South Korea had been performing to manually clean up the crude oil spill. Although the area was observed to be clean on the surface, we had noticed oil slicks in the tide pools, residual oil contamination on rocks, the outer walls of the cliff, the tide barriers, and the subsurface. The remedial measures taken by the volunteers after months have only cleaned the surface and not remedied the problem. The oil continuously seeps to the surface and the contamination is not being eliminated. Further, the months of cleanup efforts have only stripped away the residual contamination left on rocks, outer walls, tide barriers, and subsurface. There are currently 3 cleanup methods that they are using to clean up the spill and clean up the beaches affected by the spill. In observing the beach area, we have noticed that cloth towels were applied and left on the surface of the contaminants. These efforts were not only unproductive, they are causing more cross-contamination. The cloths have not resolved the oil slick on the surface and the contaminants are not being eliminated. Another method that was used to clean up the contamination was the use of a pressure hose to separate the oil particles from the surrounding landscapes. In observations of the area, we noticed a significant increase in the oil slick on the surface of the water after this method was used. The increase in the oil slick results in a greater risk of cross-contamination, which is more harmful to the ecosystem. The third method of cleanup involved using backhoes to dig up sand on the beaches and putting them into bigger and bigger piles. Not only was this unproductive, but it was also causing much more cross-contamination and not solving the problem. Using remedy. Given the current site conditions, our team proposes to apply the remedy solution through a high-pressure hose, as agitation is very important in expediting the cleanup process. When remedy is sprayed on an oil spill, the initial effect is to break up the oil spill. Once the droplets of remedy dilution have broken the binding of the hydrocarbons, the product can begin its work of breaking down the oil. The product will change the structure of the oil so that it loses its identity as an oil product and becomes water-soluble. Once this has taken place, the product will disperse soluble oil solution throughout the water available to it. A substantial reduction in the contaminant present in the surrounding areas can be expected upon application. The treatment of the rocks will generate a noticeable sheen on the surface of the water due to the permanent separation of the oil particles from the soil and the rocks by remedy. The use of remedy may generate foam. These effects will dissipate shortly after application. Visual expectations after treatment include reduction of the oil slick on the surface of the rocks. Power hose. In this application, we used a power hose to penetrate the sand and bring the oil to the surface. By allowing remedy to penetrate the sand and use agitation, we were able to bring the crude oil to the surface and start breaking it down. As the product was being applied, it was noticeable right away that remedy was working with a foam-like sheen seen on the surface and was working to remove all of the contaminants. You can see in soil samples 1 and 2 the levels of contamination present in the soil prior to the application of remedy. After the application of remedy, soil test results showed that the contaminants previously present were amazingly not detectable, as we expected, and warmly welcomed by the Korean people. In the water samples 1 and 2, you can see the levels of contamination and the difference in the levels when compared to the soil. After the application of remedy, the water test results showed that the contaminants previously present were not detectable. Again, as we expected. The use of remedy on this oil spill in Korea in 2007 demonstrated the effectiveness of an all-natural product in the world of hydrocarbon contamination. This breakthrough is both breathtaking and practical, and in the years ahead should become the first line of defense against oil spills that threaten to wreak havoc on our oceans, beaches, and our ecosystem.